Welcome, everyone, and our show, Seeing Through Animal Eyes. I am your host, Chiara Marrapodi. And as always, this show is about understanding animals without a question. Animals feel, they experience life, and seeing through animal eyes is my life's work. I want to share and explore internal realities of animals, and the guests that I have on my show have knowledge that would support us to understand them from their perspective. And this is what we're here to do. And we'll discover the richness of the natural world and learn to connect your animals in a much deeper way. So today I have the pleasure and the honor of my guest, William E. Simpson II. He's a naturalist, a rancher, and he lives among and studies Native American wild horses. They're a native species. He is an author of 2 published books and more than 100 published articles on subjects relating to wild horses, wildlife, wildfire, public land management, and he's appeared on many TV programs such as NBC News, ABC News, The Dove TV, and has been a guest on numerous talk radio shows, including Lars Larson's show, The Bill Mayer Show, and NPR Jefferson Public Radio. So we're absolutely honored, if I can call you Bill,
Yes.
to have you on our show. And today we're going to be talking about the wild horses and the importance and evolution, firstly, of the equids in general. But we're going to dive deep into the wild horses, their plight, and their connection to the ecosystem. And I think this is a really very important topic. It's very dear to my heart. And let's begin, Bill.
Sure. So where would you like to begin with the beginning of equids in North
Yes,
America?
let's start the evolution of equids in North America as a native species, because I think
Sure.
that that's misunderstood and there's so much misinformation about that. And I think if we start there, then we can really understand them from their perspective and the importance of them as a species, not only on the plains, but for us to learn from.
Right. So just to expound a little bit more on the intro, I live in a cabin. That's where I am right now, my cabin in the Soda Mountain Wilderness, and the cabin is located in the habitat of the local wild horses. The wild horses have been here in this particular area, obviously, for time immemorial, because we do have horse fossils in the area. And of course, there's horse fossils across all of North America. Um, so, so it's really natural to see horses here where I am grazing over the bones of their great ancestors. But going back a little further and taking some of the information from Professor Ross McPhee, who's the curator of mammalogy at the American Museum of Natural History. Equids evolved in North America 55 million years ago. And and 55 million years, when you think about it, compared to the record of human existence on the planet, which to our knowledge as of now is about 225,000 years, more or less. That's the oldest human fossils we can find right now. They've been here an awful lot longer than we have. So, and as a being, they're a sentient being that has a brain 2/3 the size of our brain. They're highly intelligent, and you'll hear people talk about how humans use a very small percentage of their brain. We're kind of decoupled from a lot of the capacity that our brain offers. And whereas wild horses, I think they're using quite a bit more of their gray matter than we are. And of course, they have these amazing sensory organs. They have a very large, I don't have a horse skull to show you, but they have a very large olfactory organ, so they could smell better than a bloodhound. They could smell water 20 miles away. They could smell minerals in the ground even. And you also look at their eyes. They have a very large eye. They can see in the dark as good or better than a cat. and of course their hearing is on par with a dog or any other, you know, animal like that. They hear very well. So they've got all these interesting inputs into their very large brain, and they've been connected to the planet for a very long time, much longer than we have, and to the whole universe. So when you think in terms of an evolved sentient being, I have to give them a lot of respect because they're a very successful species. I mean, we're still an unproven commodity at 225,000 years. You know, we could be gone pretty quick.
You know what?
The
I'm
way
with you.
yeah, we're our own worst enemies, you know, and
Yes.
so when I look at the horses, I look at them as teachers. How did you survive this long? You know, what are you doing right? What do you do? You know, what can you tell us? You know, and so, but you know, a lot of people don't realize the world got its horses from North America. Um, you know, right around, you know, and there's a little bit of wiggle room as far as what the uh, the archaeologists will tell you, and the geologists and the paleontologists. They all have their own views, but more or less 15 to 17,000 years ago, when the Aleutian land bridge became available, some of the equids from North America went across into Asia, and that's how Europe, Africa, everybody got their horses over there.
Mm.
Prior to that, there were no horses anywhere in the world except North America.
How interesting.
And so they got all their horses from us in North America here. And of course, now we know from the recent work with Santa Clara University, or not Santa Clara, Santa Cruz University, they've gotten some new genetic material. Some, you know, they found more horses, and they've been finding horses up in the permafrost in Alaska for quite a while now. And they found a more recent horse that has direct linkage to a lot of the horses that they found recently in Asia. You know, horses that were buried a long time ago, 5,000 years ago, and then of course horse fossils in the modern horse, E. cabalus here in North America. They're finding that the genetics are closer than they've ever, you know, believed before. That these are actually they're the living ancestors of these old horses here today in our wild horse herds.
And that
So,
right
you know,
there is such an, you know, I wanted to pause just a little bit because that's huge. And there, I don't think that they're understood and honored in that way here in America, generally speaking. And this is why we're having this conversation. Because as you said before, they use more of their brain than we could ever even fathom. But it's so much more than that, as we're going to discuss. And I really want to just pause and just take that in for a second, because that's huge. All the equids that we have all over the world are genetically related, first and foremost, to the ones here in North America.
that's correct. Yeah.
Wow.
And science is now, you know, starting to really have enough evidence to fully support that.
Yes.
Before it was just a hypothesis that a lot of people had. I mean, based on the paleontological record, you know, the oldest fossils are found here in North America. And so if you're going on, you know, who has the oldest fossils for, you know, origins, for a long time, it was in North America. Now we have the genetics showing that, you know, these in fact was the reservoir of all of the genetic material that ended up over there in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And so the equids all came from North America. And we're slowly moving past this idea also that sometime around 15,000 years ago, they went extinct in North America.
That's right. I remember reading that. That is, yes.
Yeah, so with that said, certainly, you know, there's no doubt there was a reintroduction of horses by the Spaniards, you
Yeah.
know, and, you know, people go, oh, you know, they're invasive species in North America. The Spanish brought them from Europe. They're an exotic animal in North America, but you see, that doesn't make sense. That's illogical scientifically, because just like Dr. Ross McPhee said, he gave a big lecture to the BLM, and there's a there's a transcript that can be found online. But basically, what he said in this lecture to the BLM and others in New York was that if we took Bengal tigers out of the Indian jungle and we took them to a zoo in New York, and let's say we kept them there for 1,000 years, and we kept the line going with intelligent breeding, and so 1,000 years later, we have these Bengal tigers in New York, and then we bring them back to the Indian jungle and let them loose. Are they now suddenly an invasive species? Well, of course they're not. They're a reintroduction of a native species. I mean, you have to be, that has to be a very ignorant perspective
I
to say
agree.
that it's suddenly an invasive species. But having said that, okay, we now know that there's a lot of evidence that suggests horses never did go fully extinct in North America. And the reason I say that is we're finding newer and newer fossils. Allegedly, there are fossils out there now that are dated between 5,000 and 10,000 years old, which is after the Ice Age. So supposedly they all went, extinct back during the Ice Age, 15, 17,000 years ago. So apparently that's not exactly true. And then you've got all of the writings from the French explorers, La Salle and all these French explorers. A lot of people would fail history if they took a class and had a midterm today on the exploration of North America.
Yes.
The Spaniards were still pretty much isolated on the coastlines of North America back in the 15th, 16th century, whereas the French and the French trappers were penetrated very deeply into the center of the United States, west of the Missouri River. And of course, they were encountering all the indigenous peoples and the various tribes. And these guys were cartographers and, surveyors, explorers, sailors, had, really good talents, and journalists. And they were writing down and drawing pictures of what they found. And as there was a professor up at Laval University, and her name will come to mind, Claire Henderson. And Dr. Henderson actually discovered some of these French journals in a museum, and of course they're in French, and it was I think it was in a museum in Oklahoma. And of course, not many Americans read and write French. And of course, when she found it, she's fluent in French, being a Canadian. And she realized it was really a treasure chest of information about the natural history of wild horses in North America, because the French explorers in the early 1600s ran into tribes of Indians just around the Missouri River that were talking about tribes of indigenous Indians that were just to the east of the Rockies, so farther west from where they were, more in the center of the United States, around Montana and Dakota. And these Native Americans in Missouri were saying, well, there's some strange things going on, and they drew pictures, and one of the pictures looked like a unicorn. And so, of course, the tales of unicorns go back in European history for a long, long time. And so these French explorers are going, wow, maybe there really are unicorns, because this picture this Native American's drawing of what's happening farther west looks like a unicorn. So they decided to go out there and take a look. They kept going. Of course, they were looking for trading routes for fur. They were, basically pioneering the fur trapping industry. And so they got further west, and here they ran into the Lakota tribe, who were riding horses with these highly evolved 10-foot spears hunting buffalo. Now, that's a technology, and people today wouldn't see that as a technology, but you go back to the 15th, 16th century, the evolution of a spear that's capable of taking down a buffalo, that takes a lot of trial and error.
That does.
It
does.
Carving the points, the pole it's got to be on. But the point being is when they first saw the Lakota riding and hunting buffalo, the way they carry that 10-foot spear is they keep it right over the head of the horse, between its ears.
Makes
So it
sense.
looks like a horn coming at a distance, looks like a horn coming out of the horse's head. So the 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 facts all started lining up. You know, it wasn't a unicorn; it was actually a Native American hunting buffalo with a long spear.
And you know,
And
that's an interesting point, Bill, because we there's so many optical illusions that we have, generally speaking, that we are exposed to. We don't even realize it because we can't find meaning to interpret it in the right way. So that was the meaning that they had, in terms of being able to draw it. And so, it looked like a unicorn must have had unicorns in those days. And that's an important point when we're looking at animals and looking at their reality. And it needs to be contextual to their environment, to the species that they are. And so I wanted to make that point because it's going to be the foundation point for what we're going to talk about later. And I think that's wonderful.
yeah, so the bottom line is these experiences and one of the important takeaways is this observation made by this exploration group was made in the early 1600s. So if you get these cultural archaeologists and these archaeologists and you show them, for instance, different stone axes that were used in the primitive times, they could tell you how many hundreds or thousands of years were between each iteration of the development of that technology, stone
Right,
axes or sharpened blades or whatever you want to look at. It's a
right,
technology and it takes time to learn and develop and evolve into a better instrument.
right,
Similarly with this whole thing, you have to train the horses, you have to figure out how the spear has to work, how to, there's a lot that has to go on. So how long did
right,
it take for the Native Americans to do that? Well, it didn't happen overnight. This is something that probably took, several generations. So we're talking in the realm of hundreds of years. So that would take the evolution and the existence of the horse for this to occur back probably pre-Columbus. So when you think about that, okay, so now we've got new evidence that shows pre-Columbus equids in North America. Of course, a lot of them probably did go extinct, but it doesn't mean all of them went extinct. And then, of course, we have cave paintings, and these are, very accurately dated pictographs, which are, pictures with organic materials that can be carbon dated. And so we've got pictographs in North America that have been dated back to after the Ice Age, showing various phenotypes of horses, Appaloosas and paints and so forth. So um, there's a lot of supporting evidence to show that they didn't go extinct. And not that that's an important thing, obviously,
I
but
was going to say,
the horses all came from North America. The reintroduction by the Spaniards and the Portuguese and the Vikings even are all just what equids coming home. That's all that is.
pretty much.
Reintroduction coming home. Um, so why is this important? Well, the problem we have today is we have a government agency, the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management under the Department of Interior, who apparently have an agenda that's driving horses over the edge of extinction. I mean,
Yeah.
when you reduce populations below 2,500 animals in a adult breeding adults, they have to be breeding adults. They can't be treated with contraceptive chemicals.
Right.
You need 2,500 now. There's other science that says that if you're careful and you're managing them to make sure you have good genetic representation and diversity, then you can get away with as low as 250
Mhm.
animals, all breeding adults in one herd. So what the BLM is doing though is they're slicing and dicing and reducing regional herds to, in many cases, to 50 animals or less.
Wow.
And a lot of those animals are treated with contraception,
Yes.
which is a whole nother thing. The chemical
It
contraception
is.
they're using has a host of terrible side effects.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, um, so yeah, it's important that people understand that they are symbiotic. They have a very powerful symbiotic relationship with the ecosystems they live in, and they're very beneficial. They're really hooked into all the biofield energy in an ecosystem,
And let's
You
just
know, when
explain what you mean by, this mutualism, and they co-evolved, um, the mutualist kind of relationship between the equids and the flora and the fauna. And let's talk a little bit about what you mean about the biofield. What does that mean to you, and what experience have you had with the wild ones around you? Because you are in the mountains. I think you're on the border, in the Soda Mountains, on the border of Oregon and California. And I know that you have a herd that does come visit your ranch, and they do so voluntarily. So, what do you mean when you talk about the biofield? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's not some sort of a mystical theory. It's physics. Okay. So we're talking about, and we all studied physics in college, so we understand magnetism and physics, and we are bioelectric beings, just like the horses are.
Yes.
So when you have electrical currents flowing, it produces a magnetic field. That's how generators and motors, everything work. Um, and the audience, may not realize that if, and a good example of this that's really empirical is if somebody's in like a serious accident and they're unconscious and you get to the hospital, what do? They hook up wires to your chest and your brain
Right.
because they're measuring electricity coming off of your body, but your heart signal, your brain signal. So where there's electricity, there's a magnetic field. That's just a fact of science and physics. So um, all living organisms produce a magnetic field, or a bioelectric field. And horses, of course, have a bioelectric field. All the different species that they co-evolved with over those millions of years have biofields. And so it's for people to understand it a little better, it's probably a lot like a Wi-Fi system in nature. So everything is putting out a signal, and the signal's modulated, so it isn't just a static electromagnetic field. It's pulsing, and it's modulating energy. So it's actually a form of communication.
It is.
um, Animals sense, that we talk about sixth sense. Your dog has a sixth sense. It knows if a bad guy or person is at your door, the dog starts growling. Well, why is it growling? It senses something. Well, that
You know
dog is
what's
sensing some.
interesting? There's a book that I really like that's called The Sense of Being Stared At. And Rupert Sheldrake wrote this book. And in there, for example, hunters, when they go and they're hunting in the forest, the deer will know instinctively without sound. And I know we have other sensory organs that they're probably using, but they know instinctively when somebody's watching them. And so, it's interesting about this, what you call the Wi-Fi pulsating, and there is communication, there's information. And I wonder if there's different types of information that maybe we haven't tapped into as yet, from a mechanistic perspective. It's just a thought, because it's interesting how we know when we're being watched from behind, even if someone's watching you for a while. So that sense of being stared at was an interesting concept for me.
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear, in fact, there's all kinds of tales that are empirically proven out. I have a friend who is a hunter, for instance. He's a bow hunter, and he was up in the mountains hunting, and he said that he's walking along, and all of a sudden, all the hair on the back of his neck stood up.
Right,
I mean, he could
right.
have this, and he turned around, and there was a mountain lion right behind him.
Oh my gosh, I've
And
experienced what that feels like. It's fun. It's
right.
very
So what
intimidating.
is that? I mean, he
Yes,
didn't hear the lion, he didn't see the lion, he
yes.
didn't smell the lion. It was not any of our five senses. It was
It's
the sixth
interesting.
sense.
You're right, because I remember going into the mountains once and I really needed to use the restroom. And what do? You do what you got to do. So I went behind this kind of small hill. But the whole time I was there, I crouched down and I thought maybe I should not be crouching, because I had this sense. I couldn't smell it, I couldn't hear it or see it, but something was watching me, and it was so intense. It was almost like it was boring into my body. And the only thought I had was, please just let me do what I need to do and go, because I'm not here to do anything. But I don't know what it was, but I know what that feeling is. And it was literally boring into my body from behind. I was like, I can't
Mhm.
move. I don't want to move. If I do
Mhm.
something too fast, I don't know. So that's interesting. It's a very interesting experience.
Right. So that's an example that maybe a lot of people can relate to because they may have experienced that themselves.
Yes.
I mean, we're really disconnected from our sixth sense, um, and that's about the societal meme that we're in now. We've moved
Correct.
into an unnatural phase of human evolution. We're controlled and we're managed more by artificial forces, no longer by nature. When
Correct.
we were connected to nature, we had to be in touch with everything around us. We had to have this ability, this sixth sense to survive. Now the wild
Yes.
horses, because they live in a wild environment with their predators, they have to be totally connected, not only to their predators, but also to all the other co-evolved species of flora and fauna.
Yes.
Um, the Native Americans have a saying that the grass knows the horse and
Yes.
the horse knows the grass. Well, they're speaking in their way about this mutualism, this symbiotic relationship that the horse has with flowering plants,
Yeah.
and which is they benefit each other. People don't see it that way, but if you think about it for a minute, grasses, you have to understand the biology of a horse, but the grass needs to spread its seed. I
Correct.
mean, it goes and has to reseed to have future generations. And when you think in terms of what a horse does, a horse has a single stomach, so they're not very good digesters. So, and this is part of their co-evolved relationship with the flora and fauna. With regard to the plants, when they eat grass, most of the seeds come out the other side and drop back onto the ground, and they're droppings
Mm.
that still grow. Most of almost, like 90% or something of the seeds they eat will, in fact, when they basically, drop some droppings on the ground, those are, I've taken a lot of pictures of horse
I'm
manure.
sure you have.
Uh,
I have a horse. The
and
first thing
a
I
lot
do
of
is eat
times,
or poop.
yeah, a lot of times I'll have other wildlife ecologists up here, and I'll walk along and I'll find, something's been there for maybe a year and dried out, and you break it open, and you can see all this vegetative material, and then you'll see seeds,
Yes.
and then as soon as that little, and actually what it is, a little ball of humus,
Yes.
and it contains microbiome. It's like a little universe all by itself. It's got the bacteria and all of the various microorganisms that are critical for soil to be alive.
Do you
And as
know
soon as it, go ahead.
what I want to say is, how beautiful is that? What you just described. It's a mini universe with the microbiome, with the ability to sustain life. And
Mhm.
right there, that for me, not just because of what wild horses can teach us, and we'll talk about that at some point, but right there, the value, you can't put a price on that, because right, that's life, that's creation, that's sustaining the environment, and that bidirectional mutualist symbiotic relationship between the wild horse, the flora, and the fauna. It's imperative for the plains, the mountains, everything related to where we live, where we situate ourselves. Even though we have disconnected ourselves, I think that's a mistake. And I want to bring this to light because I want to show that this is beautiful. This is amazing. That mini universe in poop, really. But you have the humus in there, but it's a complete microbiome. That's amazing. It's interesting how nature is so perfect and purposeful
Mhm.
in so many ways
Well,
that we, you know,
evolution doesn't make mistakes. I mean, if something
yes,
has survived, in the case of
correct,
wild horses, 55 million years, it's doing something right because
yes,
nature selects very quickly against something that's not working right.
yes,
So
yes,
it dies out. That's what happens. So when I walk around and I see the horse droppings, I see not only the next evolution of life, but I also see how this really interesting mutualism, this evolved symbiotic relationship, benefits not only the horse because they get nourishment, and then the plant gets the benefit of having its seeds spread in a way that's actually superior to, for instance, birds. Birds will drop seeds on top of the ground. Now, they'll eat them and then carry them somewhere, fly around, and then drop them out in their droppings, but they're exposed to the sunlight and to other forms of predation of the seed by other seed eaters.
And so,
Um,
with this respect, Bill, if you don't mind, I really want to talk about the difference between the bovine gut, because there are
mm,
they basically they have chambers and they ferment what they eat, and so therefore they
mm,
don't have the seeds in their droppings.
right.
And also how this relates to fire management, because I
Mm,
know that your research has shown that actually the wild horses are imperative to ensure that we have and we don't have raging fires like what we've been
mhm,
seeing. And I think that's a very important point, and it's a very important way to begin to bring some weaving some threads of truth into why wild horses are valuable, and that their plight really is something that it shouldn't be happening. They should be valued and honored, and
mm.
preserved. So let's talk a little bit about that, if we may.
Sure. Yeah. So and yeah, we're going that direction. Obviously, I wanted to make sure the audience has a
Oh, please,
foundational
please,
knowledge
please.
of the biology, the digestive
Yes.
biology of the horse, because
Okay.
they basically have one stomach, and so when their droppings are humus balls, basically, that contain the whole microbiome and the seed. And as soon as that little dropping ages and then gets a little water, the seeds germinate. And
Yeah.
so the interesting thing about what the horse does is it provides the seed with a superior environment to germinate in, contrary to the other seed dispersal methods, like by birds and things. The birds don't provide like a little potted plant. It's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
the seed is in the humus, it's got its microbiome. The microbiome is what digests dirt and makes it into soil, because it takes inorganic minerals and all the little microbiome, all those little critters, the bacteria and so forth, create bioavailable minerals, which the plants uptake, which makes for healthy plants.
Yes.
So this is a long evolved relationship, and it also benefits other herbivores, because as the horses are reseeding very successfully, so it creates plant life that also feed the deer, all the other small and large herbivores, the lagomorphs and so forth. You've got all these other species that also depend upon a good vegetative cover.
Right.
The horses do that. Now, in the when we talk about ungulates, which are animals that have multi-chambered stomachs, chew a cud, have a cloven hoof, etc., it'd be cattle, sheep, goats, deer, bison. Um, they have these complex stomachs, so when they eat the seeds of plants, they digest most of them because they're a very efficient digester,
Yep.
and so they do not reseed. And so when we go back in North American natural history, and we maybe go back 500 years ago, we had a distribution. Some people say there may have been 50 million buffalo or bison in North America, and as many as 20 million horses. Well, there was enough horses to make up for the loss of reseeding from these other ungulates, which digest everything. The horses were reseeding, and so there was a balance. And that's the thing about evolution. Evolution favors balance and sustainability. Things that tend to imbalance tend to go away. And so when we see this beautiful balance now that we've interrupted through our infiltration onto the North American continent, human activities
Mhm.
have disrupted this balance, and the way the evolution had guided the ecosystems to being these beautifully balanced. It's like a orchestra in perfect tune.
Literally, it is a
Everything's
symphony.
working.
You're right.
It is.
It really
And
is.
so the introduction of invasive species, cattle and sheep in North America started changing everything.
Yes.
They were grazing off the plants and grasses. There was no natural reseeding
Mm.
by those animals. There was still some reseeding by birds and whatever residual horses there were. But our activities starting back, in the, prior to the Civil War, even, the cavalry wanted horses, and so they would commission Native Americans and other people to round up horses out of the mountains, and they became cavalry horses. A lot of them became food for soldiers, and so on and so forth. So we have a long history of taking more than we should have removed off of the landscape. And of course, in World War One, we sent 1 million of our horses to Europe that were used in the World War One for the war effort and for food. And of course, now you look across the United States, the BLM is engaged in the largest roundup of wild horses in recent history.
Yes.
So, um, so what's happening is we're wondering what's going on in the landscape. Well, what's going on now is not only have we basically decimated the bison, which is an herbivore that reduces, all of the annual grasses and brush, but also we've decimated our cervid population. So deer and elk, caribou are significantly declined. Dr. William Ripple has a paper about the decline of large body herbivores
Mm.
and how that they studied, I guess, 5 continents in his study, and on all 5 continents where you have a depleted herbivory, catastrophic wildfire evolves. Well, that makes sense because the herbivory is what controls the level of grass and brush. And
Yes.
people always tend to think in terms of trees with wildfire. It's really not about trees. We could go outside. We could take a portable camera, and you and I could go outside with the audience, and I could take my torch, my propane torch, which burns at 1700 degrees Fahrenheit, and hold it up against any of these conifers outside the ranch here. And I can hold it there for 5 minutes, and that tree does not catch on fire because
Interesting.
the bark is an insulator. They're fire
Correct.
evolved trees. That's not enough heat. So how do you ignite large heavy fuels? Well, you need kindling, and Cal Fire has a handbook for firefighters, and in that handbook they talk about 1 hour class fuels. Well, what is a 1 hour class fuel? It's the main event in every fire. And 1 hour class fuels are fuels that are 1/4 inch in diameter or smaller. So
Mhm.
basically, those are fuels that when they're dry, in climate change, we've got a warmer, drier, longer, hotter summers. So the class one fuels, the grass and brush, they get dry sooner, they get drier, and they stay dry longer,
Right.
ready for any source of ignition. And when that stuff catches on fire, it is what a fireman would call an accelerant. It burns
Right.
very hot and very fast.
Yes.
So it ignites the heavy fuels. It's the kindling that ignites the heavier fuels. So heavy fuels, that's trees, buildings, dead logs, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So what happens is since we've lost our herbivory, California is down over 2.5 million deer, just California.
I
Is
know.
why is that important? Well, two
It's
and a half
important.
million deer, they eat about 3 million tons of grass and brush every year. And
Yes.
this comes back every year. See, the
Yes.
grass and brush comes back every year. Without the herbivory, this stuff is uncontrolled now. And so now what we're seeing in California and elsewhere, because of these prodigious fuel levels, because of the loss of the herbivory, um, the for the first time in history, we're seeing entire forests of fire evolved trees decimated by fire.
Yes. And that's very,
This
very,
is
very
shocking.
sad. It's shocking.
This is shocking because these
Yes.
trees need fire to reproduce.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this this is a very important part of what I would like to bring to people's understanding, that when we're looking at animals, when we're looking at nature, not only is context important to understand from the animal's perspective, from the natural world's perspective, like why is this something that has been a part of the natural world, a part of the ecosystem? What are the mutualistic symbiotic relationships that are there in it? We need a more global view, a more coherent view of this. And I know that we're running out of time for today's episode. And what I want to do is I want to say that this episode is the foundational piece for our next episode together, Bill. And we'll be talking more about your experience with the wild ones, experiences that you have seen between the wild horses and people that you've known, how they've been touched by them. And, if it's possible, I would love to share a video of the wild horses that come to visit you and any stories that you have, so that people can understand that it's not just that they're valuable in the natural ecosystem perspective, but they have so much to teach. And you've been with them for 7 years. So, you've had time and chance to really interact with them, and they trust you. I know that they trust you. And they come to you when they need support as a herd, which I think is absolutely amazing, but I'm not surprised. Animals know when a human is trustworthy, when you come from your heart. So I wonder if we might be able to re-engage this conversation in our next episode and bring those elements in, because I think that's an important part.
Yeah, yeah, certainly we can. And and we can also talk about the empirical evidence that we collected during the wildfire that was in the area of our herd
Please,
here.
I would
You
like
know,
to do that.
yeah,
Yes.
we saw how important they were in allowing the fire, Cal Fire, to help control that fire, because the fire came into an area that had been symbiotically grazed by the horses, and the fire lost its ferocity. The
Interesting.
intensity of the fire went down, and then
Yeah.
that gave Cal Fire a break, the break they needed to really get control of it.
And I think, yes, let's tack on the next episode starting from there, and then moving into your experiences with them, because they've really touched you, and you are one of the most informed advocates and naturalists that I've ever spoken to in relation to looking at the equids from their perspective, how they are interacting, as we've said, symbiotically with the environment. But then of the different experiences that you've had with them. And I think these are really important points that I really want to convey to the audience. So we'll leave it there for today. And I thank
Mm-hmm.
you, everyone, and Bill, for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor.
It's
And
been
we'll
my
see you
pleasure
next
too.
time. Great.
Yeah, I'm honored